jump right into today's topics. The first thing we're talking about is ekphrasis. It's a style of poetry usually, but it can be done in other mediums as well. So it just means ekphrasis typically means a descriptive poem. And of course, it's going to be focused generally on the shield of Achilles. Here is a rendition, modern rendition. We of course don't have any artifact that we think is Achilles' shield. I'm not even sure there really was one. But it is a very detailed description, and Homer clearly puts a lot of thought into it. An ekphrastic poem, according to poetryfoundation.org, is simply a vivid description of a scene, or more commonly a work of art, through the imaginative act of narrating and reflecting on the action of a painting or sculpture. The poet may amplify and expand its meaning. It may seem a little strange to think about action when you're looking at a painting or sculpture or an object or something that's still and inanimate. But that's what makes this poetry, this kind of poetry, so intriguing, is that the poet who is staring at something as simple as a Grecian urn or a shield, or any number of objects, really begins to explore the significance, the meaning of it, the possible metaphors, and all kinds of things. And there's really just an endless sea of poetic possibilities here. Now, the subjects of ekphrasis can be anything. It's often and most commonly a work of art. So it's really, art about art. This is poetry about usually visual art. But it can be anything. I mean, it really can. I've read good poems on fruit, and of course, we've got Homer writing about weaponry. So the point is that this is an exercise in description, but as we'll see, it's more than just trying to get the physical features of a thing right. It's more than even doing that in flowery language. What's it about? Well, before we get there, let's talk about the media for ekphrasis, because it really helps me to sort of convey to you what this poetry is supposed to be doing. It's normally poetry, okay? So it's written, it's a poem on a page. But the truth is that it can happen in a lot of other media as well, even though it may not be called ekphrasis all the time. That sculpture right there was by an artist named Brancusi, who was so smitten with birds in flight that he was trying to capture, in some sense, the essence of flight itself. He kept working on his sculptures of birds in flight until he just basically pared away everything except for what looked to him to be the essence of the physical flight of a bird. Now, it's a highly abstract, as you can see, but what he's trying to do there is capture the kind of inner essential beauty of something that he could see with the naked eye. What you can't see with the naked eye, right, is the spiritual aspect of physical flight. And that's what he's aiming at. And that's what an ekphrasis poem tries to do. I've been to see the Mona Lisa before, and frankly, I was kind of young, and it was just something to check off my list. Now I've seen the Mona Lisa, but it didn't strike me that well. It didn't make a big impact on my life. Later in life, I've spent time in front of paintings in New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art that have captivated my imagination, held me in place for many minutes as I sat and thought and write and looked and went deeper inside the painting. It's the power of really paying attention and listening to something that gives rise to the ekphrastic poem. Here are a few notes before we go into the spiritual reasons for writing ekphrasis a little more deeply. Basically, it's more than mere description, but it is description. That's where it begins. It begins in just looking at something and describing it. So the point is that description becomes a kind of art form in itself. Is this competition with the original work? Not really. In fact, in some ways, it's advocating for the original work, if you want to think of it that way. The whole point of describing the thing you see is to draw out the beauty of it for in another form, so to speak, using words rather than images. And I don't know. I don't think it's really a competition. It's art upon art. Subject again is usually, but not necessarily, a work of art. We're going to be working through this later. You are not going to be required to use a work of art. Any object in your home would work, and you're aiming at a kind of essential meaning or significance. Okay, so those are our baselines. Now, why would we do this? Why would we keep on writing ekphrasis poetry? Well, there's a pretty strong spiritual reason for it. I'll never forget this moment in my life. When I was a senior at Wheaton College, I had not taken some of the prerequisites that college required. I was actually a transfer student. So one of them was art class, and my then girlfriend, but now wife, told me that if I took Professor Thompson's class on art, it would change my life. And I was excited. I was wide-eyed. I loved college, and I was ready for it to happen. So I went to this class, and it really did. He opened up my eyes. He made me think I could look at art. He made me think it was accessible to me. I didn't have to memorize all of the isms and all the movements to get it right. It was just a matter of looking carefully and observing things that were obviously there, but maybe I had never put a name for, composition, stroke, line, shape, those simple things like that. Well, the kind of capstone of the course was to go to the Chicago Institute of Art, which was downtown, and at the time free of charge. It's not that way anymore, but it was free of charge. We went on a small tour with him, and then we had an assignment to take our journals and find a work of art and spend 30 minutes standing, looking, sitting, and looking, just looking. 30 minutes. Don't go anywhere else. Don't look anywhere else. Study the thing for 30 minutes. Only rule was it had to be in the modern or contemporary section. Now that this is the place where people have taken Christmas lights and wadded them up on the floor and plugged them into the wall and called it angst number 3 or something like that. And so there's some stuff down there that's just, you're like, how could this possibly be considered art? It's pretty strange. But I was like, I'm ready for the challenge. I'm ready to look at even an abstract work of art. And so I remember I came upon an Agnes Martin painting, and like most all of her paintings, it was very simple, very geometrical. The color spectrum in it was minimal. At least that's what they tell me. You guys know I'm kind of colorblind, but I'm pretty sure it was mostly gray. Anyway, I sat there for 30 minutes and I just looked at the thing. And all I can say is that when I was done with the 30, well, I didn't stay 30, it was more like 45, but when I was done, I had just pages upon pages of notes, things I'd written, observations that I'd scribbled. I had walked up so close to the painting to look at it that a security guard, reprimanded me for getting too close. And this painting that would have seemed to me just boring, simple, something to just move past by and possibly scoff at, had actually totally captivated my imagination and had provided numerous metaphors for thinking about life and faith and the world I lived in. So ekphrasis is really kind of a spiritual exercise. It is designed to teach us to be quick to hear. It is an exercise really in learning to pay attention to something outside ourselves. Probably one of the best examples of an extended kind of ekphrasis would be a book, actually, by a guy named Henry Nouwen, who's one of my favorite Christian authors. He was smitten with Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal, which you can see pictured here on the left. And he wrote a whole book of it called The Return of the Prodigal Son. And he basically, it's not a poem, and the book is a book of spiritual teaching. But he basically took this one poem and just went down inside of it and stared and looked for hours and hours and found basically layer upon layer of really insightful truth into the gospel, into the life of the Christian, our relationship with the Lord. He had as much to say about the son, the real prodigal there, as he did about the father, about the brother who looks on. He saw things that, for sure I didn't see, even though I've looked at this painting several times. Here's a little example of what he did. And hopefully what I hope you gain from this is that there is real value in paying close attention to art. There's real value in paying close attention to the objects in our lives. And while I'm not asking you to write, prose on the spiritual life, I am asking you to write a poem, a more traditional ekphrastic poem. I hope by now you're kind of seeing what this is aiming at. I'm trying to get you to go inside, so to speak, inside an object, to look at something physical and see what might be there on a spiritual level. Here's what Nouwen says as he looks at this painting by Rembrandt. As I look at the prodigal son kneeling before his father and pressing his face against his chest, I cannot but see there the once so self-confident and venerated artist who has come to the painful realization that all the glory he had gathered for himself proved to be vain glory. He's talking about Rembrandt there. Rembrandt was a, kind of an up and down artist and had gone from having great fame to kind of diminished reputation and even had a lot of personal struggles. Instead of the rich garments with which the youthful Rembrandt painted himself in the brothel, that's reference to another painting, he now wears only a torn under tunic covering his emaciated body, and the sandals in which he had walked so far have become worn out and useless. Moving my eyes from the repentant son to the compassionate father, I see the glittering light reflecting from golden chains, harnesses, helmets, candles, and hidden lamps has died out and been replaced by the inner light of old age. It is the movement from the glory that seduces one into an ever greater search for wealth and popularity to the glory that is bidden in the human soul and surpasses death. So just take a moment here and look back at it again and you see what he's talking about, how the Father's face, now that you look at it, almost radiates. It's almost a source of light in itself. Sorry, my study dog is here with me. And then the sun there, his face is darkened. His whole head is like creating shadow. Shoes are worn out. So yeah, there's a comparisons of different kinds of glory there, a different kind of beauty.